The revelation that humanity might be the legendary apex predators hung over the group like a death sentence. Marcus could see the fear in his fellow captives' eyes, but also something else. A stubborn refusal to accept guilt for crimes they hadn't committed. It was, he realized with grim irony, exactly the kind of response that probably confirmed the aliens' suspicions. The lead Zephyrian gestured, and the chamber around them transformed once again. The walls became a canvas for three-dimensional images that told a story spanning millions of years. Ancient star maps appeared, showing the rise and fall of countless civilizations across the galaxy. Long ago, when our species was young and still bound to our homeworld, our ancestors received warnings from a dying race called the Eternals. The aliens' mental voice carried the weight of legend. The Eternals had lived for billions of years, watching the cosmos evolve, guiding younger species toward wisdom and peace. They were the gardeners of the galaxy, nurturing growth while preventing the kind of unchecked expansion that could upset the cosmic balance. The images shifted to show beings of pure energy, graceful and ethereal, tending to worlds like cosmic shepherds. Their forms reminded Marcus of the aurora borealis, beautiful and otherworldly. The Eternals spoke of a species they had encountered in the far reaches of space, a young race that defied all their attempts at guidance. These beings possessed a trait that the Eternals found both fascinating and terrifying. They refused to accept limitations of any kind. When told something was impossible, they took it as a challenge. When faced with extinction, they adapted beyond all reasonable expectations. Professor Elena Volkov, a Russian xenobiologist who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Every successful species has survival instincts. What made these beings different? The Zephyrians' form pulsed with patterns that suggested deep contemplation. The difference was scale and persistence. Most species adapt to their environment. These beings adapted their environment to themselves. When their world became uninhabitable, instead of finding a new home, they rebuilt their planet from the ground up. When resources became scarce, they didn't learn to use less. They found ways to create more. The holographic display showed worlds being terraformed with impossible speed, dead systems brought back to life, and technologies that seemed to violate fundamental laws of physics. The Eternals tried to guide them, to teach them the wisdom of limitation and balance. The beings listened politely, thanked them for their wisdom, and then proceeded to ignore every piece of advice that suggested they should accept any boundary whatsoever. Marcus found himself oddly proud of these ancient predecessors, even as he recognized the implications. What happened to them? Did they destroy the Eternals? No, came the reply, accompanied by color patterns suggesting confusion and unease. They did something worse. They inspired them. After eons of careful, measured existence, some Eternals began to wonder what lay beyond the self-imposed limits of their philosophy. Small groups broke away, seeking to explore the boundaries of possibility rather than maintaining the status quo. The images showed energy beings stretching themselves into new forms, reaching into dimensions that had previously been forbidden, pushing against the very fabric of reality. This split caused the first civil war in eternal history. In the end, both factions destroyed themselves. Those who held to tradition couldn't survive the chaos, while those who embraced limitless growth consumed themselves in their hunger for transcendence. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her scientific mind working through the implications. So the Eternals blamed this other species for their downfall, even though the choice to change was theirs alone. The dying Eternals left warnings across the galaxy, hidden in the quantum structure of space itself where only sufficiently advanced civilizations could find them. They described the traits of the apex predators and warned that such a species must never be allowed to reach the stars. The Zephyrians' form darkened to deep purples and blacks. We have spent the last 50,000 years searching for signs of their return. Sergeant Rodriguez crossed his arms, his expression defiant. And you think that's us? Because we don't give up when things get tough? It is more than persistence, the alien replied. Observe these recordings from your recent history. New images filled the air, scenes from Earth that Marcus recognized with growing amazement. Humans crossing frozen continents in search of new lands, building cities in deserts and swamps, diving to the deepest ocean trenches, and reaching toward the stars. But the images also showed humanity's darker side. Wars fought with devastating efficiency, resources consumed with frightening speed, and environmental destruction on a planetary scale. You survived an ice age that should have driven your species to extinction. You developed agriculture in regions where it should have been impossible. You built civilizations that spanned continents despite having no natural advantages over countless other species. And in just the last century, you have progressed from primitive flight to walking on your moon. The alien paused, allowing the weight of humanity's rapid advancement to sink in. But most telling is this. When faced with the very real possibility of destroying your own world through pollution and warfare, your response was not to scale back your ambitions, but to begin planning your expansion to other worlds. You see the solution to the problems of growth not as accepting limits, but as finding new frontiers to grow into. Marcus felt a strange mixture of pride and horror as he recognized the truth in the alien's words. Humanity did indeed seem incapable of accepting the word impossible or the concept of enough. Even now, trapped aboard an alien ship with their fate uncertain, his mind was already working on escape plans and contingencies. The final proof came when we abducted you, the Zephyrian continued. Every other species we have tested eventually reaches a point of despair or acceptance when faced with insurmountable odds. You have been separated from your world, placed in impossible situations and shown that resistance is futile. Yet even now I can sense that none of you have truly surrendered. You are all still planning, still seeking weakness in our defenses, still believing that you can find a way to overcome us. The accuracy of the observation sent chills through the group. Marcus realized that even as he listened to their captors' explanations, part of his mind was cataloging details about the ship's layout, analyzing the aliens' behavior patterns, and formulating theories about their technology. So what happens now? Dr. Martinez asked quietly. Do you destroy us to prevent this prophecy from coming true? The Zephyrian's form shifted through a rapid sequence of colors before, settling into a pattern Marcus hadn't seen before, gold and silver spirals that seemed to pulse with uncertainty. That is the question that has divided our people since we found you. Some believe we should eliminate your species before you can spread beyond your world. Others argue that we should guide you, as the Eternals tried to guide your predecessors. But there is a third faction, one that asks a different question entirely. Marcus leaned forward. What question? Whether the Eternals were wrong about the apex predators being a threat. Whether the hunger for limitless growth might not be a curse to be contained, but a gift the universe has been waiting for. The word predators hung in the air like a physical presence, sending chills down Marcus's spine. Around him, the other humans exchanged worried glances as the full weight of their situation began to sink in. They weren't just subjects for study. They were specimens being examined for potentially dangerous characteristics. The lead Zephyrian's form shifted colors to deep amber and silver, patterns flowing across its membrane like living artwork. Your confusion is understandable. Allow us to provide context. In our travels, we have encountered legends of a species so adaptable, so relentlessly aggressive in their survival instincts, that they posed a threat to the cosmic order itself. These beings were called the apex predators, not because they consumed flesh, but because they consumed challenges, impossibilities, and the very concept of defeat. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the woman in the lab coat, struggled to her feet. Despite her fear, her scientific curiosity was clearly overwhelming her terror. What makes you think we might be these predators? Humans are just one species among billions on our planet. We're not particularly special in any biological sense. The alien's response came with undertones of what might have been amusement. Observe. The chamber around them suddenly shifted, walls becoming transparent to reveal the vast interior of the alien ship. They stood on a platform suspended in a space so large it seemed to contain its own weather systems. Floating islands of various sizes drifted through the air, each one containing what appeared to be different environments: forests, deserts, Arctic landscapes, and some that defied earthly comparison. Each of these biomes represents a world we have studied, the Zephyrian explained. Civilizations that reached impressive heights before succumbing to their limitations. Observe their final challenges. Images began to flicker in the air around them, three-dimensional holograms showing alien cities and landscapes. Marcus watched as a crystalline civilization crumbled when their energy source depleted. Another species resembling giant butterflies simply gave up when their climate shifted beyond their comfort zone. A third race advanced beyond human comprehension, quietly faded away when they deemed existence no longer interesting. Each reached a point where progress became impossible, where adaptation was no longer feasible, where the logical response was acceptance of limitations. They chose the wisdom of surrender. The alien's mental voice carried what might have been respect for these lost civilizations. Yet preliminary observations of your species suggest a different pattern entirely. Sergeant Rodriguez, one of the military personnel, stepped forward with the bearing of a man accustomed to taking charge. You want to know what makes humans different? We don't know when to quit. Sometimes that's stupidity, sometimes it's courage. Most of the time it's both. The testing began immediately. The humans were separated into smaller groups and placed in different chambers, each designed to present what should have been insurmountable challenges. Marcus found himself alone in a room that seemed to shift its very physics every few minutes. Gravity would suddenly reverse, the air would become thick as syrup, or the floor would turn to liquid without warning. Any rational being would have simply waited for the torment to end, accepting that escape was impossible. Instead, Marcus did what humans do. He adapted. When gravity reversed, he used furniture to anchor himself. When the air thickened, he found ways to move efficiently through it. When the floor liquefied, he learned to distribute his weight and move differently. Through some kind of viewing system, he could see the others facing their own trials. Dr. Martinez was in a chamber where the laws of mathematics seemed to change randomly, making her calculations meaningless. Instead of giving up, she began developing entirely new approaches to problem solving, creating logic systems that could function even when basic constants shifted. Rodriguez faced a combat simulation where he was vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Rather than surrender or fight a conventional battle, he began using the environment itself as a weapon, turning the simulation's own systems against his opponents. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time seemed flexible in this place. The Zephyrians watched everything with growing fascination, and what Marcus was beginning to recognize as concern. Their forms shifted through color patterns that suggested intense discussion, though he could no longer hear their mental communications. When the testing finally stopped, all the humans were brought back together in the original chamber. They were exhausted, some injured, but none had broken. None had surrendered. Even when faced with impossible odds and illogical challenges, they had continued to fight, adapt, and search for solutions. The lead Zephyrian approached them again, its form now cycling through rapid patterns of color that reminded Marcus of agitation or anxiety. Your responses are unprecedented. When faced with impossible challenges, every other species we have studied eventually accepts defeat. You do not. Even when victory is mathematically impossible, you continue to seek alternatives. Dr. Martinez wiped sweat from her forehead and managed a tired smile. That's because we don't believe in impossible. Difficult, yes. Unlikely, certainly. But impossible is just a word we use for problems we haven't solved yet. The alien's form stilled for a moment, patterns freezing in place. This confirms our greatest fear. You are indeed the species our ancestors warned about. The question now is what we do with this knowledge. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. What did your ancestors say about these predators? The Zephyrians' response came heavy with the weight of ancient dread. They said that once the apex predators reached the stars, nothing in the universe would be safe from their hunger for growth and conquest. They would not stop until they had consumed every challenge, overcome every obstacle, and made the entire cosmos their domain. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of the ship's systems, as 20 humans stared at their captors and realized they might not be prisoners after all. They might be defendants in a trial for the future of their species. Within 20 minutes, the humans had turned the Zephyrian, ship's pristine fabrication, facilities into something resembling a cross between a weapons factory and a mad scientist's laboratory. Dr. Martinez had jury-rigged the molecular assemblers to create explosive compounds that technically shouldn't exist under normal physics. Professor Volkov was growing biological agents that could survive in the void of space. Rodriguez had somehow convinced the ship's computer to help him build kinetic weapons using the artificial gravity generators. The Zephyrians watched in fascination and horror as their carefully ordered vessel was transformed into a chaotic workshop of improvised destruction. Their technology, designed for precise scientific applications, was being brutally repurposed in ways that violated every safety protocol they had developed over millennia. This cannot possibly work, the lead Zephyrian protested as Marcus welded together what appeared to be a crude projectile launcher using components from a quantum resonance scanner. These modifications will destabilize the quantum matrix of our systems. Good, Marcus replied without looking up from his work. If we can't understand their technology enough to counter it properly, maybe we can confuse it by being completely unpredictable. The sound of metal being dissolved grew louder, accompanied by an unnatural silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. Through the ship's communication system, they could hear Zephyrian crew members screaming in terror as they encountered the Devourers for the first time in a million years. "They're in the secondary hull," one alien reported, its mental voice tight with panic. "The boarding parties are spreading through Deck 7. Everything they touch just stops existing. Matter, energy, even quantum information. It all becomes void." Dr. Martinez looked up from her work, her hands stained with chemicals that glowed with their own inner light. "How do you fight something that can erase anything it touches?" "You don't fight it directly," Rodriguez said, connecting his improvised kinetic weapon to the ship's main power grid. "You fight everything around it. Make the environment so chaotic that it can't focus on erasing specific targets." As if summoned by their conversation, the chamber's main entrance suddenly went dark, not broken or destroyed, but simply absent, as if that section of reality had decided to stop existing. Through the void that had once been a doorway, shapes began to emerge. The Devourers defied description. They seemed to be holes in space itself, vaguely humanoid gaps in reality that hurt to look at directly. When they moved, they left trails of nothingness behind them, and anything that came into contact with their forms simply ceased to be. They didn't walk so much as flow, reality parting before them like water. The Zephyrians immediately began attempting to communicate, their forms blazing with patterns meant to indicate surrender and peaceful intent. The Devourers ignored them completely, reaching out with appendages made of concentrated void to touch the nearest alien. The Zephyrian vanished without even a scream. "Now," Marcus shouted, and chaos erupted throughout the chamber. Rodriguez's kinetic weapon fired, launching a stream of superheated metal projectiles at velocities that should have been impossible within a ship's hull. The projectiles didn't hit the Devourers directly. They passed through the void beings without effect. But they struck the walls, floor, and ceiling around them, sending shrapnel flying in every direction and filling the air with debris. Dr. Martinez activated her chemical weapons, filling the chamber with gases that reacted violently with each other, creating explosive chain reactions that turned the very air into a weapon. The substances weren't designed to harm the Devourers. They were designed to create so much chaos that the void beings couldn't focus on their reality-erasing abilities. Professor Volkov released her biological agents, organisms that had been modified to survive in impossible conditions and multiply exponentially when exposed to exotic energy. They weren't meant to attack the Devourers, but to consume and transform anything the void beings tried to erase, turning deletion into creation. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The Devourers, accustomed to simply erasing any resistance they encountered, found themselves in an environment where destruction only created more chaos. Every surface they touched exploded into new forms of matter. Every attempt to create void was immediately filled with rapidly reproducing organisms. Every focused erasure was countered by dozens of random explosions and chemical reactions. For the first time in a million years, the Devourers hesitated. Marcus seized the moment of confusion to grab the lead Zephyrian. "How do we get to their ship?" "Not to destroy it, to board it." "Board it?" The alien's mental voice was barely coherent with shock. "That is suicide. Even if you could somehow reach their vessel, the moment you made contact with it, you would cease to exist." "Not if we're already in the process of ceasing to exist," Rodriguez said, understanding Marcus's plan immediately. "Doc, how much of that self-destruct compound do you have left?" Dr. Martinez grinned with the expression of a woman who had just been asked to commit beautiful mayhem. "Enough to turn us into walking bombs. The chemical reaction will consume our bodies completely, but there's a 17-second delay before total molecular breakdown begins." 17 seconds, Marcus mused. "That's enough time to cause some serious damage if we can get aboard their ship." The Zephyrian's form cycled through colors that spoke of absolute disbelief. You are suggesting that you deliberately poison yourselves with a substance that will kill you, board an enemy vessel made of concentrated void, and attempt to damage it from within while dying. When you put it like that, it sounds kind of stupid, Professor Volkov admitted. But it's the kind of stupid that no sane species would attempt, which means they won't see it coming. More devourers were flowing into the chamber now, but they were moving more cautiously, clearly confused by the chaotic environment the humans had created. Their reality-erasing abilities were still functioning, but the constant explosions and chemical reactions were making it difficult for them to target specific threats. Rodriguez was already preparing his modified kinetic launcher for mobility, turning it into a weapon that could be carried and fired while running. The way I see it, we're probably dead anyway. At least this way, we take some of them with us. And maybe, Dr. Martinez added as she began preparing doses of her molecular breakdown compound, we give our new friends here enough of an advantage to survive this encounter and actually help our species when they get back to Earth. The lead Zephyrian was quiet for a long moment, its form cycling through patterns that spoke of deep contemplation and growing respect. You would sacrifice yourselves for a species you met only hours ago? For people who abducted you and planned to judge your entire race? Marcus checked his improvised weapons one last time, feeling the familiar calm that came before dangerous action. That's what humans do. We protect people who need protecting, even if they're not our people, especially if they're not our people. Besides, Rodriguez added with a grin that would have terrified any sane being, someone needs to teach these devourers that erasing things from existence only works if your targets are polite enough to stay erased. The countdown to their suicidal assault was about to begin, and for the first time since the battle started, Marcus felt confident about their chances, not because their plan was likely to succeed, but because it was so completely insane that even cosmic forces of destruction wouldn't know how to respond to it. The Devourers were about to learn why the universe had been waiting for humanity to reach the stars. The assault on the Devourer ship was unlike anything the universe had ever witnessed. 20 humans, their bodies already beginning to break down from Dr. Martinez's molecular poison, launched themselves through the void between vessels using nothing but improvised rocket packs built from Zephyrian life support systems. They weren't trying to survive the journey. Survival was impossible. The vacuum of space, the radiation, and the chemicals in their bloodstream would kill them long before they could return. But they had 17 minutes before the poison completely dissolved their cellular structure, and that was more than enough time to cause absolute havoc. Marcus led the charge, his rocket pack sputtering and sparking from Rodriguez's hasty modifications. Behind him, the others followed in a loose formation that no military academy would have recognized, carrying weapons that no engineer would have approved, on a mission that no sane tactician would have planned. The Devourer ship was a nightmare to behold. Where the Zephyrian vessel curved with organic grace, this craft was angular and wrong, its geometry hurting to perceive directly. It seemed to exist in more dimensions than human minds could properly process, and looking at it too long caused physical pain. But as they approached, something unexpected happened. The ship's hull, which should have erased them from existence upon contact, instead began to react to their presence in ways that defied its own nature. Professor Volkov's biological agents, spread throughout their suits and equipment, were already beginning to interact with the void matter in impossible ways. The organisms are adapting to the deletion field, Dr. Martinez reported over their communication system, her voice already beginning to slur from the poison's effects. They're treating the void as just another extreme environment to colonize. Rodriguez, ever practical, was more focused on immediate concerns. Great, how do we get inside this thing? The answer came from Marcus, who had been studying the ship's structure during their approach. We don't break in. We make ourselves too chaotic for the ship to exclude us. Everyone activate your randomization protocols now. This was perhaps the most insane part of their insane plan. Each human had been fitted with devices that would randomly alter their molecular structure every few seconds, making them exist in a constant state of quantum uncertainty. The theory, developed by Dr. Martinez in a fit of inspired madness, was that the Devourer ship's deletion systems couldn't erase something that was already constantly changing into something else. The effect was immediate and nauseating. Marcus felt his body shifting and fluctuating as the randomizers altered his quantum signature dozens of times per second. He could see the others experiencing the same disorientation, their forms blurring and shifting like mirages. And it worked. The ship's hull, faced with targets that refused to maintain consistent existence long enough to be properly deleted, simply gave up. They passed through the void matter like ghosts, finding themselves inside a structure that existed in the spaces between reality. The interior of the Devourer ship was impossible. Corridors led in directions that didn't exist. Rooms were larger on the inside than the outside, and everything was bathed in a light that somehow managed to be darker than complete darkness. Gravity worked sideways and time seemed to flow in eddies and currents rather than a steady stream. "Stay together," Marcus commanded, though he wasn't sure how together was possible, in a place where geometry had given up trying to make sense. "Remember, we're not here to understand this place. We're here to break it." They spread out through the ship, each human becoming a nexus of chaos in the perfectly ordered void. Rodriguez found what might have been the ship's power systems, and began his work with the dedication of a craftsman, methodically destroying every component he could reach with tools that shouldn't have been able to affect void matter at all. Dr. Martinez located what appeared to be a control center and began introducing her chemical agents into the ship's systems. Her poison wasn't designed to kill the Devourers. It was designed to make their technology as unstable and unpredictable as human improvisation. Professor Volkov found the ship's data core and released the last of her biological agents, organisms that would treat the vessel's information systems as a new ecosystem to colonize and transform. If the Devourers were going to erase existence, she would at least ensure that existence fought back. But it was the younger members of the team who achieved the most spectacular results. Sarah Kim, a graduate student who had remained quiet throughout their captivity, found the ship's dimensional stabilizers and began feeding them paradoxes, mathematical equations that couldn't be solved, logical statements that couldn't be resolved, and programming loops that would run forever without completing. The effect on the ship was immediate and catastrophic. Systems that had operated flawlessly for millions of years began to hiccup and stutter. Deletion beams fired randomly, erasing sections of the ship's own hull. Dimensional walls collapsed, creating spaces that existed in several realities simultaneously. Through the chaos, Marcus could hear something he had never expected. The Devourers were screaming. Not in pain exactly, but in something that might have been confusion or even fear. For beings that had existed since the beginning of time, the concept of malfunction was completely alien. "Time check," Rodriguez called out, his voice barely recognizable through the communication system. 8 minutes left, Dr. Martinez replied, though her words were becoming increasingly difficult to understand as the poison affected her nervous system. It was then that Marcus realized their real mission wasn't just to damage this ship, it was to teach the Devourers something they had never learned in their millions of years of existence. They had to show these cosmic forces that deletion was not the end of possibility, but simply another problem to be solved. He made his way deeper into the ship, following corridors that led him through spaces that might have been other dimensions, other times, or other universes entirely. At the ship's heart, he found what he was looking for: the central void, the core of nothingness from which all deletion originated. It was beautiful in its absolute emptiness, a sphere of perfect nothing that existed in the center of everything. And around it, Marcus could sense the presence of the Devourers themselves, not their physical forms, but their consciousness, their will, their absolute certainty that existence was a temporary aberration in the cosmic order. Marcus activated the last of his equipment, a device so simple that any advanced civilization would have dismissed it as primitive. It was nothing more than a recording device, loaded with the sounds of Earth. Human voices, music, laughter, crying, the sound of wind through trees and waves on beaches. As the device began to play, something impossible happened. The void began to resonate. The Devourers had spent eternity in perfect silence in the absence of everything. They had never heard sound, never experienced the vibrations that carried meaning and emotion across space, and now in their most sacred space they were hearing the universe sing. The effect was overwhelming. Systems throughout the ship began to shut down, not from damage but from confusion. The Devourers, faced with something they couldn't delete because it wasn't matter or energy but pure information, began to experience their first moment of uncertainty in eons. Marcus smiled as the poison finally claimed his nervous system, his body beginning to collapse at the molecular level, but he could feel it. A change in the cosmic order itself, a crack in the absolute certainty that had driven the Devourers to consume reality itself. They had succeeded. Not in destroying the Devourers, but in teaching them that even nothing could be something. If you approached it with enough creativity and complete disregard for the rules of possibility, the universe would never be the same. The Zephyrians' words sparked intense debate among the human captives, but before anyone could respond, the ship suddenly shuddered. Emergency lights began flashing throughout the chamber, casting everything in an ominous red glow. The alien's form rapidly cycled through patterns of what could only be alarm. "We are under attack." The mental voice carried undertones of shock and disbelief. "This is impossible. No species has the technology to threaten us in deep space." Another violent shake nearly knocked the humans off their feet. Through the transparent walls, Marcus could see explosions blooming like deadly flowers against the star field. Ships appeared from nowhere, their dark hulls seeming to absorb light itself. They moved with predatory grace, striking at the massive Zephyrian vessel with weapons that tore through its defenses like paper. "Who are they?" Dr. Martinez shouted over the growing noise of battle. The Zephyrians' response came heavy with ancient dread. "The Devourers. We thought them extinct for over 1,000,000 years." Through the chaos, more Zephyrians appeared in the chamber, their forms blazing with patterns of urgent communication. Marcus caught fragments of their mental exchanges, tactical data, damage reports, and something that chilled him to the bone, casualty numbers that climbed with terrifying speed. "Your presence here has awakened something that should have remained dormant forever," the lead Zephyrian explained, its attention split between the humans and the battle raging outside. The Devourers were the reason the Eternals became gardeners of the galaxy. They consume not just resources or territory, but the very essence of life itself. Everything they touch becomes nothing but empty void. The attacking ships were winning. Marcus could see entire sections of the Zephyrian vessel simply vanishing, not destroyed but erased from existence. The alien technology that had seemed so advanced now appeared helpless against this ancient threat. The Devourers hibernate between galactic ages, awakening only when they sense the presence of species capable of rapid expansion. The Zephyrian continued. "Your kind's energy signature must have triggered their emergence. They see you as competition for the resources of this galaxy." Sergeant Rodriguez grabbed one of the aliens by what might have been its arm. "Then release us. Give us weapons. If these things are a threat to both our species, we should be fighting them together." The Zephyrian's form shifted to patterns Marcus was beginning to recognize as incredulity. "You would fight beings that just demonstrated the ability to erase our most advanced warships from existence? Your people have never even left your solar system." "That's exactly why we'd fight them," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "We don't know enough to be properly terrified." Another section of the ship disappeared, taking several Zephyrian crew members with it. The remaining aliens were in clear panic, their forms cycling rapidly through colors that spoke of desperation and fear. It was then that Marcus realized something crucial about their captors. "You've never really fought for survival, have you?" he asked the lead Zephyrian. "Your species developed beyond scarcity so long ago that you've forgotten what it means to face extinction." The alien's pattern slowed, settling into colors that suggested confusion and a hint of shame. "We are explorers, scholars, gardeners of knowledge. We study and preserve. We do not. We have never needed to. You've never needed to fight dirty," Rodriguez finished. "You've never had to choose between destruction and doing whatever it takes to survive." The ship shuddered again, and through the transparent walls they could see Devourer boarding pods attaching to the hull. The dark metal seemed to spread like infection wherever it touched the Zephyrian ship's surface. "They're boarding us," one of the other aliens communicated in a mental burst of pure terror. "The containment fields are failing. They'll be here in minutes." Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane under any other circumstances. "Release us and give us access to your weapon systems. Not your fancy disintegration rays or whatever. Show us your most basic primitive armaments." "We have no primitive weapons," the Zephyrian replied. "We evolved beyond such things eons ago. Our technology is based on harmony with natural forces, not crude destruction." Then we'll make our own, Dr. Martinez said, her mind already working. Show us your fabrication facilities. Give us raw materials. And whatever you do, don't try to guide us or suggest improvements. The lead Zephyrian hesitated for a moment that felt like an eternity. Another explosion rocked the ship, and they could hear something cutting through the hull nearby. This is madness. Even if we grant your request, what could you possibly accomplish that our advanced civilization cannot? Professor Volkov smiled grimly. We can be unreasonable. Your technology works by understanding and manipulating universal laws. These devourers have apparently found ways to circumvent those laws. But humans have a talent for breaking rules that shouldn't be breakable. The sound of metal tearing echoed through the chamber, followed by something that made Marcus's skin crawl. A noise like reality itself was being unwoven. The devourers were getting closer. Decide now, Rodriguez commanded. Fight with us or die wondering what might have happened if you'd taken the chance. The Zephyrian's form went completely still for a moment, then exploded into patterns of gold and crimson that spoke of desperate resolve. Access granted. May your gods forgive us for what we're about to unleash. Barriers throughout the ship dissolved, giving the humans access to fabrication chambers, raw materials, and technical databases. As they scattered to begin their work, Marcus called after them. Remember, we're not trying to match their technology or understand their science. We're trying to be so completely unreasonable that they won't know how to respond. Dr. Martinez was already at a fabrication unit, her fingers dancing over controls she barely understood, creating designs that no sane engineer would attempt. Rodriguez was studying schematics for the ship's power systems, clearly planning modifications that would horrify any safety-conscious civilization. Through it all, Marcus could hear the devourers getting closer, their very presence seeming to drain the life out of everything around them. But for the first time since their abduction, he felt truly hopeful. The aliens were right about one thing. Humans were predators, but not the kind that consumed worlds. They were the kind that consumed impossibility itself. And they were about to show the devourers what that really meant. The battle for the survival of two species was about to begin, fought not with advanced technology or ancient wisdom, but with the most dangerous force in the universe, human ingenuity backed into a corner with nothing left to lose. Captain Marcus Chen had been working late in his office at the Arctic Research Station when the lights went out. The emergency generator kicked in moments later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside, expecting to find a simple power grid failure. Instead, he found himself staring up at something that defied explanation. A massive ship hung silently above the research facility, its hull reflecting the aurora borealis in impossible patterns. The vessel was easily the size of 3 football stadiums, with smooth curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal. Strange symbols pulsed along its surface with a soft blue light that made his eyes water when he looked directly at them. Marcus reached for his radio, but his hand froze as a beam of white light descended from the craft. The light touched the ground near his feet and began to expand outward in a perfect circle. Everything the light touched simply vanished, not destroyed, not vaporized, but gone as if it had never existed. The snow, the rocks, even the air itself seemed to disappear into nothingness. Panic seized him as he turned to run, but the light moved faster than his legs could carry him. The moment it touched his boots, Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation that quickly spread through his entire body. His vision blurred, his hearing faded, and then everything went black. When consciousness returned, Marcus found himself lying on a surface that felt like warm glass. The air around him hummed with an energy that made his skin crawl. He sat up slowly, his head spinning from whatever had happened to him. The room he found himself in defied description. The walls seemed to curve impossibly, meeting at angles that hurt to contemplate. Soft light emanated from everywhere and nowhere, casting no shadows despite its brightness. Other figures lay scattered around the chamber on similar glass surfaces. Marcus counted at least 20 people, all unconscious, all wearing the same confused expression he imagined was on his own face. Some wore military uniforms, others civilian clothes. A few appeared to be scientists based on their lab coats and equipment. A sound like wind chimes mixed with whale song filled the air, and Marcus turned toward its source. 3 beings stood at what he assumed was the entrance to the chamber, though he hadn't seen them arrive. They were tall, perhaps 8 feet in height with elongated limbs that moved with fluid grace. Their skin appeared to be a shifting pattern of colors that reminded him of oil on water, constantly changing from deep purple to silver to green. The beings had no visible facial features that Marcus could recognize, yet he somehow sensed they were observing him with intense curiosity. One of them glided forward, moving without seeming to take steps. When it stopped just a few feet away, Marcus could see that what he had taken for skin was actually some kind of bioluminescent membrane that pulsed with their heartbeat. Without warning, a voice spoke directly inside his head. It wasn't his own thoughts, but something alien and vast that made his mind feel small and fragile. The voice carried with it emotions and concepts that no human language could express, yet somehow he understood its meaning perfectly. Greetings, creature of the third planet. We are the Zephyrians, travelers between the stars. You have been selected for observation and study. Do not fear. No harm will come to you during this process. Marcus tried to speak but found his voice wouldn't work. The being seemed to sense his attempt at communication, and the voice in his head continued. Your species fascinates us. We have observed many worlds, studied countless civilizations. Yet yours presents unique characteristics that we must understand. You will be our guests until our curiosity is satisfied. The other humans in the chamber began to stir, their groans and confused muttering filling the air. A woman in a lab coat sat up nearby and immediately began hyperventilating when she saw their captors. A soldier rolled to his feet and reached for a weapon that was no longer there, his hand grasping empty air. Please remain calm, the voice continued, now apparently speaking to all of them simultaneously. Resistance will only cause unnecessary distress. You have been chosen because each of you represents a different aspect of your species. Together you will help us answer the questions that brought us across the void to your world. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. What questions? The being tilted what might have been its head, and the membrane covering its form rippled with patterns of deep red and gold. We have traveled for eons, cataloging the species of 1,000,000 worlds. Most follow predictable patterns. They evolve, they grow, they expand until they reach the limits of their environment, and then they either transcend or perish. Your species does neither. You thrive in conditions that would destroy others. You adapt to impossibilities and you never surrender, even when surrender would be the logical choice. The chamber filled with a sound like distant thunder, and Marcus realized it might be the alien equivalent of contemplative silence. The being continued, its mental voice carrying undertones of something that might have been confusion or even concern. We must understand what makes you different. What drives you to fight when fighting is futile? What allows you to survive where others cannot? Are you perhaps the predators that our ancient texts warned us about?